You see, friends, here's the idea. Every single group of people in the world has a defining aspect that describes who they are and what they're all about. For example, for Americans, it's freedom. For comedians, it's laughter. For nurses, it's compassion. For toddlers, it's curiosity. For models, it's beauty. For hermits, it's solitude, right? Every group of people has a defining aspect that describes who they are and what they're all about. And so you know what, this morning as we continue our series, Summer Travels with Jesus, here's the question that we're going to be looking at today. Take a look. What is the defining aspect of a Christian? In other words, of all the ways that we could describe ourselves, what is the one thing that defines us as a people? What is the one thing that brings us to understanding who we are in this world today? Now, the natural thing for us to do would be to say, hey, well, if we want to understand what is the defining aspect of a Christian, we should just open up our Bibles, and we should look at every place that it says Christian, and then just read what it says. Okay, we could do that, but we would be done very, very quickly. Because believe it or not, the word Christian only appears in the Bible 3 times. Only 3 times the word Christian is mentioned. And here's why. Back then, Christians did not call themselves Christians. Instead, if you remember this, it was a derogatory term that was used to describe that group of people. In other words, if somebody called you a Christian, it was meant to be hurtful. In fact, here's what happened. After Jesus had ascended into heaven, there was this persecution that broke out in Jerusalem against this group called the Followers of the Way. And these followers of the Way, they began to disperse throughout the countryside. Some of them went to a city called Phoenicia. Some of them went to a city called Cyprus. Some of them went to a city called Antioch. And while these followers of the way, while they were in Antioch, they began to tell the people in the city about this man named Jesus. This man who had healed people and had performed miracles. A man who had died on the cross and a few days later had risen from the dead. And the people in the town of Antioch, they were amazed at hearing this. And so they joined this group of followers of the way, and they started a church. And over a short period of time, this church grew and grew and grew, so much so that some of the apostles who were still in Jerusalem, word got back to them about this church. Like, hey, there's this church in Antioch that has grown by leaps and bounds. We should go check it out. And so they said, hey, Barnabas, why don't you grab Saul, who would later be called Paul? Why don't the 2 of you go and check out this church in Antioch? And so, friends, take a look at what happened here in Acts chapter 11. It says, then Barnabas went to Tarsus to look for Saul, and when he found him, he brought him to Antioch. And so for a whole year, Barnabas and Saul met with the church and taught great numbers of people. The disciples were called what? Christians first at Antioch. You see, the very first time that the term Christian in the history of the world was pronounced was in the city of Antioch. And remember, this wasn't a term that Christians called themselves. This was a derogatory term. In other words, people would say, hey, you're one of those people. You're a follower of the way. You're a follower of Jesus Christ. You're a Christian. And so you know what? This is why it's so difficult for you and I to open up our Bibles and simply say, well, hey, if we want to understand the defining aspect of a Christian, let's just look at all the places that it says Christian, because there's only 3 of them. But you know, at the very same time, if you look throughout the New Testament, time and time again, they called themselves a term that was consistent throughout the New Testament, not just 3 times, but 261 times. Friends, anybody want to take a guess what that term is? I heard it, disciple. Take a look, disciple. The very first Christians called themselves disciples.